Welcome to the first lecture for Urban Anthropology. The course materials for the first module take a broad look at how cities first developed, what happened next, and where we stand in terms of urbanization in the present day. The development and proliferation of cities has entailed a series of monumental changes in the way our species inhabits the planet, so the theme for this module is the urban revolutions. A key role of anthropology is to denaturalize phenomena that seem natural, inevitable, standard, eternal, or normative. The division between the city and the countryside is one such phenomenon that we tend to take for granted. The geography of this course in urban anthropology provides a case in point. I'm teaching this digital course from a place called the Adirondack Park. The park is a 6 million acre wilderness area located about a 4-hour drive north of Manhattan, home to some 130,000 year-round residents. In the 19th century, it took 26 hours to get to the heart of the Adirondacks from New York City by train and then horse-drawn coach. Today, I can reach you at John Jay in a matter of seconds by digital means, a consequence of the phenomenon Marx called the annihilation of space by time. Altogether, the Adirondack Park has about 7 people per square mile. The borough of Manhattan, by contrast, has about 72,000 people per square mile. This is a good example of uneven development, one of the main themes of this module's materials. How did it come to pass that these two places could exist in such close proximity to each other? Today, the propinquity of the extremely urban and the extremely rural doesn't seem all that strange. But if we go far back enough in human history, we find that no such division between the city and the country existed. One major goal for the first part of this course is to understand when, why, and how that happened. Anthropologists believe this development to be sufficiently important to deem it a revolution. In fact, we must consider 3 revolutions: the agricultural revolution, which would pave the way for the urban revolution, and the industrial revolution, which would accelerate it. Recently, a new debate has unfolded about a potential 4th revolution, the dawn of the urban age. This debate revolves around the possibility that more people may now be living in cities than elsewhere, another first for our species and our planet. What we know about the earliest revolutions comes primarily from the anthropological subfield of archaeology. The approximate dates and locations provided in this lecture reflect the current scholarly consensus, but archaeological knowledge can sometimes be shattered by new discoveries. The interpretation of specific archaeological sites, such as Çatalhöyük, pictured above, is sometimes contested, and you can read more about this particular debate in the supplemental readings. Note also that the term agricultural revolution is sometimes also applied to other, later historical developments. For our purposes, the agricultural revolution means the Neolithic revolution, or the period of time when, to the best of our knowledge, humans first began to cultivate plants and domesticate animals. As described in more detail in your readings, the Neolithic revolution began some 10,000 years ago in the Near East and entailed 3 primary changes: the intentional cultivation of crops, especially cereals and legumes, the beginnings of animal management, including the tending of sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle, and the settlement of previously nomadic peoples into small villages. These changes would give rise to another transformation whose significance to human history is difficult to overstate: the possibility of a social surplus. If you take nothing else away from V. Gordon Childe and Michael Smith's contextualization of his work, be sure to take this: the development of a social surplus, made possible by the changes of the Neolithic Revolution, eventually freed some people from the constant struggle of food procurement. This in turn provided the possibility for the development of more complex divisions of labor, resulting in the further possibility of not only labor specialization, but social inequality. For Childe, these changes laid the groundwork for urbanization. As Michael Smith notes, Childe used this term to describe more than just the rise of cities, which occurred first in Mesopotamia. He used it to describe the far broader development of complex, state-based societies, of which cities were one crucial component. The uneven development that is readily observable on our planet today is directly traceable to these early shifts in the organization of space and the organization of society. The materials in the second part of this module focus primarily on 2 ideas: urbanization and uneven development. Both terms are used to describe not only a condition, but the ongoing process that produces the condition. Urbanization refers to the increasing concentration of the human population into cities and the forces driving that process. Uneven development refers to the unequal distribution of people, resources, and wealth, and the forces producing that outcome. Urbanization and uneven development are often addressed by scholars in the context of a related, though non-identical concept, globalization. At its most basic level, globalization means the increasing connectedness between places, including cities, across planetary space. So we might conceive of human history after the urban revolution as one in which cities are both proliferating and growing, but they are growing at different rates in different areas, to different scales, and some are even disappearing. Yet the ones which remain are becoming increasingly connected to each other. Altogether, we might therefore think of urbanization as a process of global, uneven development. The article by Alan Smart and Josephine Smart gives a broad overview of urbanization in the context of globalization. There are a few salient points to take away from this. 1. Globalization is not new, but has ancient roots. 2. Uneven development manifests at multiple scales, as evidenced by both vast disparities within cities and vast disparities between the global south and the global north. 3. Our world is not necessarily becoming deterritorialized, rather space matters in new ways. And 4. Globalization is fundamentally social, changing the way in which people live within cities and between them. Smart and Smart don't really offer an explanation for why all this occurs. That's okay, since this is a review article and it's not really meant to do that. For explanation, we turn to David Harvey, bearing in mind that his analysis pertains to the way globalization, urbanization, and uneven development work in the mode of production we live with now, capitalism. Harvey's interpretation of what drives globalization is one of many, but I happen to think it's the best one, which is why I'm making you read it. Harvey's idea of the spatial fix is a bit complicated, but if you bear the following premises in mind, you'll be ahead of the game. 1. That capitalism is fundamentally suicidal, doing what it does so well that it generates internal crises it then has to solve. 2. What it generally does well, far better than the poor Neolithic farmers mentioned by V. Gordon Childe, is create surpluses, essentially indulging in too much of a good thing. 3. That capitalism is expansionary by design, always wandering across space in search of solutions to these crises of surplus. 4. That the solution lies in finding some place to dump those surpluses. 5. That the fix is only ever temporary, and soon enough another crisis of surplus emerges and the cycle begins again. So if globalization entails the increasing interconnectedness of places, Harvey feels that this is what drives those connections. Cities and their infrastructures are particularly important sinks for capital surpluses, hence their growth and sometimes decline. As capital repeats this pattern of investment and disinvestment, it leaves uneven development in its wake. The final part of this module covers a brewing argument between geographers and demographers over an urban premise most of us have come to take for granted. Some years ago, the United Nations declared the dawn of an urban age in which, for the first time in the history of our species, more than half the global population is living in cities. Brenner and Schmidt think they're wrong, and explain why in their article questioning the thesis of the urban age. Partly this has to do with the way in which we define cities, so this is a useful moment to go back to the readings on the smackdown between archaeologists and geographers over what constitutes a city. Henri Lefebvre, by contrast, isn't terribly worried about the numbers. He argues that we are already in a state of total planetary urbanization, not because the entire planet has become a city, but because no part of the planet remains undominated by urban society and its industrial demands. In the next module, we turn to cities themselves in order to understand how the forces explored in the materials from this module shape the production of space at the urban scale.